Thank you all for being with us today. Jay Ziabart, nutritionist and health educator, and I'm Megan Mesher-Cox. We host this disease prevention and reversal summit and hope to be able to provide more information out there. So good information that's really evidence-based healthcare information and truly lifestyle medicine. And I want to introduce Dr. Lowe. Thank you so much, Dr. Lowe, for being with us. If you all don't know Dr. Lowe, he's been in our community for decades and recommended a whole food plant-based diet, and he was lifestyle medicine before lifestyle medicine really existed. So we're so thrilled to have him here. Hopefully, he might make note of it the whole conference, but we'll also talk about it afterwards. He brings the whole conference to Camarillo every year. So Dr. Lowe is talking on super immunity. I'll hand it over.
All right, thank you, Dr. Megan. I was tasked with the option here of talking about super immunity, and even though I'm going to focus primarily on the nutrition aspects, hopefully we can close this out in a more broader lifestyle medicine approach to immunity. Everyone's thinking about immunity now with the COVID pandemic raging all around us, and so what better time than now to talk about super immunity. Now, when we talk about immunity, we're talking more than vaccination. We're talking about, and more than just to infectious diseases, like whether it be measles or chickenpox or smallpox or polio or COVID. We're talking about even fighting things like cancer. And it's what does the body do to protect itself, to heal itself, to restore health, to be resilient against damage, and because we live in an environment that is constantly attacking us, and the body has ways to defend itself. And so having a healthy immune system means having a healthy defensive and healing mechanism within the body. And we're going to kind of look at different aspects of the immune system, and they do all kind of tie together, but just for the ability to kind of dissect them out a little bit and concentrate and focus on each of the different aspects of immunity, and some of which have been already talked about today. First, we want to look at cellular immunity, then the antibodies or proteins that are manufactured in defense, the inflammatory and anti-inflammatory components, the antioxidants, the DNA repair and protection, the angiogenesis, inhibition, and the microbiome. So when we talk about cells, we're talking about primarily these white blood cells. This is a blood smear. The little red things are the red blood cells. The white blood cells have a nucleus, and so you can identify them. They're also larger. Some of them can be granulated. But this is what we see in medical school, or pathologists see, or laboratory techs see under the microscope of your blood. And the white blood cells are part of the cellular immune system. And they're also, some of them are also part of the antibody immune system. But these particular ones are the ones that kind of go around and swallow up and eat and digest basically the foreign material that's considered harmful, particularly bacteria. And in the process of ingesting a bunch of them, they finally kill them by releasing a very toxic substance to kill whatever they've ingested. But unfortunately, in the process, they basically kill themselves. And so these are the soldiers that die in action and that give their lives in order to, can you see that now? Okay. Yes. So they have given their lives basically for you in defending the body. Now, these are natural killer cells. Natural killer cells are part of the innate immune system. In other words, they do not need any prior exposure to be effective. They are part of the system that will go around monitoring and attacking anything that it deems foreign or dangerous, particularly cancer cells, but even infected cells. So your cells that have been infected with the virus, let's say particularly COVID, is now deemed dangerous. And so these natural killer cells will even kill the foreign infected cell. And so in a way, it's kind of attacking itself in the process. Natural killer cells circulate through the body, and they are very important because they are the first means of defense. The reason why children do better than adults in COVID is because the natural innate killer cell immunity is very high compared to those who are elderly. But people that are elderly can also have a very healthy natural killer cell activity and number if they follow good health principles, which we'll enumerate later. The natural killer cells, the way they act is by attaching themselves to the foreign cell that it wants to destroy. It releases enzymes into it by injecting enzymes into the cell to cause it to die. Now, you can see here a kind of a photomicrograph of an antibody. Antibodies are part of the proteins that are elaborated as far as what we call the adaptive immune system. And so you need some prior exposure in order to elaborate these proteins. And the body does that in a very interesting way. So this is more of a diagram of that same structure, kind of a gross diagram to simplify it, in which there are some stable parts of the antibody, and then there's the variable parts of the antibody on the ends of the Y. And those variable things are adapted to a specific part of the invading organism or virus that it wants to attack and attach itself to in order to neutralize it and in the process of eliminating it. And so as we have developed the vaccines to the COVID vaccine, it's giving the body exposure to the spike protein and that alone. And so therefore the antibodies that are formed in response to the vaccine are antibodies that are specific for that particular spike protein. So therefore, as the spike protein changes or mutates, then the antibody's ability to attach itself to that virus and that spike protein is going to be more difficult or less effective. And that's why we see less effectiveness with the new variants in regards to vaccine protection, because these are very specific antibodies. Now, part of other parts of the protein response to infections or invasion or attack are not only the blood antibodies called immunoglobulin G, but immunoglobulin A or secretory IgA. These are antibodies that coat the membranes of our bodies, our respiratory membranes, our gastrointestinal membranes, and they really form the first line of antibody defense. Another thing that's elaborated is a protein called interferon. Interferon is also one of those kind of innate immune system where it basically helps orchestrate the innate or the first response to infection. And so its activity is very, very helpful in regards to our defenses and orchestrating our antibody response. Now, this just gives a diagram of how the body processes these foreign substances, the antigens, and the antigen is just a part of a bacteria or virus that the body chooses to form antibodies against. And it's processed through a number of different mechanisms of blood cells. And basically what it does is it basically processes it to form antibodies specific to what it wants to attack, but it also sends away memory cells in order to remember that. So upon further exposure in the future, it can respond more quickly. Now, there's also the part of the immune system called the inflammatory system. And inflammation acutely is good because that's a process that the body puts in place in order to heal and restore damaged or injured tissue. And so acute inflammation is something that is good. Chronic inflammation, however, is not good. Chronic inflammation would be like, instead of just banging your knee or shin up against a coffee table once every month or once a year, would be banging it 3 times a day. And you can imagine what difference that would make to your shins after a while. And so chronic inflammation is not something that is particularly healthy. And so there are things that can help reduce the amount of inflammation, particularly chronic inflammation. Inflammation happens to be the basis of a number of diseases, and it's wide-ranging, anywhere from cancer to diabetes to arthritis. Most people can think of pulmonary diseases like chronic inflammatory bronchitis, which is asthma, and the autoimmune diseases, but even such thing as Alzheimer's or even multiple sclerosis. All of these things can have an underlying chronic inflammation to them. So the regulation of inflammation is kind of key. One of the central parts of the inflammatory process is a substance called arachidonic acid, and it results in a number of problems as diagrammed here. But what you want to take away really is more what is happening with the formation of arachidonic acid. Sometimes you get it naturally, just already in the foods themselves, like animal fats and things like that, shellfish that have arachidonic acid already formed in them, or you can form arachidonic acid more through particularly vegetable oils and increase that transformation of what we call the omega-6 fatty acids through more insulin. So the more insulin that's stimulated or secreted, whether you have insulin resistance and you have more insulin secreted to control your blood sugars, or whether you have a high sugar refined carbohydrate diet, and so that upregulates the amount of insulin you're using, that promotes at the same time an increase of formation of arachidonic acid, which is then pro-inflammatory. Whereas the omega-3 fatty acids, which you can get from flax and walnuts and chia and those kind of seeds, hemp seeds, those form the omega-6 chain down to the EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, and the DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, which are anti-inflammatory. So you have this balance in the body. And what you want is a healthy balance. You don't want it to be overly on the inflammatory side. So everyone keeps pushing omega-3s because they're trying to counteract the excess of omega-6s. However, if you just cut down the omega-6s, you don't need that much omega-3s. So this diagram just illustrates how both kinds of foods, whether they're arachidonic acid-rich foods like egg yolk, red meats, poultry, and organ meats, have in themselves arachidonic acid already, or whether you consume vegetable oils or highly processed carbohydrates, sugars, high glycemic carbohydrates that will upregulate insulin, which will promote more production of arachidonic acid. And so that's just a diagram of that. All right, so as I mentioned before, the body is under attack from various things, whether it's just being out in the sun, you get sunlight, UV radiation. If you go get an X-ray, you get ionizing radiation, or if you're around anything that's radioactive, smoking, just normal eating causes oxidative stress on the body, because oxidation, you're using oxygen, we breathe in oxygen for purposes of oxidizing things, even our food, and for energy that produces possibly free radicals, and those must be neutralized in some way. Fortunately, if you eat the right foods and get enough antioxidants, then you can neutralize those things and prevent what's going to happen in the way of free radicals attacking your DNA and causing damage, either to your cells in regards to aging and degeneration, or actually the nucleus of the cells, and then causing changes in the cell to become cancerous. Cancer isn't something that you get by infection or by eating or by smoking or anything like that. What happens is cancer forms when you have your own cells that become rogue cells because of their being damaged. They no longer want to just cooperate with all the other cells. They want to live only for themselves. They want to keep growing and dividing. They never want to die and give up themselves. They just want to hoard everything for themselves. And so in the process, they destroy the host. So nature has provided us with a variety of what we call antioxidants that protects us from the oxidative stress and the free radicals that are generated either by exposure or even just from just being alive. And so these come in a variety, fortunately, of colors, and each color represents kind of a different type of antioxidant. And we could spend a long time just on this, but just realize that trying to address the spectrum. So as Jay was talking about eating a variety of foods, look at a variety of colors and try to eat the rainbow every day. So this is what we mean by the rainbow. You can go to the produce section of the market and you see all this wide variety and array of colors. And this is what you want, the natural colors. You don't want this kind of color variety. So in regards to the DNA, when we talk about the DNA, this is just a diagram of the DNA structure, which is the very nucleus, the genetic material within each cell of your body, except those like the red blood cells, which don't have a nucleus. But these, the nucleus is the blueprint, you might say, for your body. And so oxidative free radicals that are generated can attack and damage the DNA structure. The body has repair mechanisms to repair the DNA, but sometimes those can be overwhelmed. And when they're overwhelmed, then changes occur, genetic mutations occur, causing either cancer or in the process of reproduction can cause genetic malformations. Then when we talk about angiogenesis, angiogenesis has to do with the generation or the beginning of angios or blood vessels. And blood vessel growth is a good thing because blood vessel growth means there's more blood flow, more circulation. And so angiogenesis to some extent is good. Again, just like in the case of inflammation, you want a balance between angiogenesis as far as blood vessel formation and blood vessel restriction. And what do I mean by that? Well, we have problems when we have excessive angiogenesis. So let's say in the case of diabetic retinopathy, you have this proliferation of blood vessel growth in the retina. And so that's why sometimes they try to destroy those or curtail those by laser therapy. You have rheumatoid arthritis. You have cancer. Cancer is the big one. And yet, on the other hand, you can have insufficient angiogenesis where you don't have enough blood flow, whether it's stroke, heart disease, ulcers, and some of these other conditions. So you want a healthy balance. And the interesting thing is food will give you the healthy balance. It's drugs that can drive either these excessive or insufficiency to unbalance. And so doing it with foods is the better way to do it. Angiogenesis, what happens is that particularly with cancer cells or even other cells that are not getting enough oxygen and nutrients, they will send signals out to the blood vessels, and the blood vessels will respond by branching out and sending a blood vessel to it. So you want that to happen in cells that are not getting enough oxygen, but bad cells like cancer cells that would want more circulation and blood flow to it so it can grow even faster, that's where you want that not to happen. And so you can see that the cancer cell is very good at attracting blood vessel growth to it, and thereby that's how it can grow faster and bigger. And also that's the way it can then infiltrate or invade those blood vessels in order to spread itself to other parts of the body that we call metastasis. So this is a study that Dr. Dean Ornish did in regard to VEGF, which is vascular endothelial growth factor. And so that is a pro-angiogenic type of substance. That's what sprouts new blood vessel growth. They can measure that. And so in the intervention group, which was his group that had mainly a plant-based diet and exercise and social interactions and stress reduction, they're in the blue, and you can see the levels of VEGF are much lower than in the group that did not have that type of intervention. You might call it the standard American lifestyle. In regards to another compound called platelet 4 and heparinase, you see that in the intervention group, they had higher levels of these. These are anti-angiogenic. And so they had a much higher levels of these factors as opposed to those in the red, which did not have any intervention. And so there's not a good balance here in the angiogenesis. So you have things that promote angiogenesis, excessive blood vessel growth, and that's not good for cancer. Well, the microbiome, we want to spend a lot of time on the microbiome. That is, Jay talked a lot about that, which is excellent. And it's been interesting that now that as they've looked at the microbiome, they can predict now with 92% accuracy those who will do well with COVID and those who won't, depending just on their microbiome. That's just fascinating. And so if there is a preponderance of this Faecobacteria prausnitzii, you will do well with COVID. And if you don't have it, you're not going to do well. And that comes from a plant-based diet. When you have the microbiome is consisting of basically all the bacteria in your body, but the great majority of the microbiome is in your gut. There's some in your respiratory tract, like your mouth and your sinuses and the nasal pharynx. But and some on your skin, but the great majority is in your intestinal tract. So much so that, and this is just the combination of bacteria primarily, but there's some protozoa, there's some parasites, there's some viruses, there's all kinds of things, yeast, there's all kinds of things in your particularly colon or large intestine that have more bacteria cells than are cells in your body. And you can look at it as either 50-50 or even a 10-to-1 ratio of bacteria to human cells. And when it comes to genetic material, we're way outnumbered in genetic material when you have that many bacteria compared to how many 22,000 genes that we have. So you see that the huge influence that the microbiome can play, and we're just now learning to understand more and more about it. We know now that the more fiber you have, then the more short-chain fatty acids are produced by the bacteria digesting that, and that reduces the cytokine storm, which we know is a big factor in one of the stages of COVID. And that the changes you make in the microbiome occur within 30 hours of ingesting. So it's not something you have to wait for days and days and months. But just within 30 hours, the microbiome will change. And we're learning that things that affect the microbiome really affect our health. And that's such things like proton pump inhibitors, strong, powerful antacids, which will have been shown to those people who are on PPIs, like Nexium and Protonix and omeprazole or Prevacid or those types of things that are very powerful. They've been shown that they can increase those who get more severe COVID by 2 to 4 times. And of course, we already know the effect that antibiotics can have on the microbiome as well, because they wipe out some of the bad cells that you're trying to use antibiotics for, but it can also wipe out some of the good cells, good bacteria in your colon particularly. And so we're learning that the health of the intestinal microbiome affect a large number of different diseases, but we really want to focus on primarily the immune system. So when we look at immunity, we're talking about these different systems that I talked about before in regards to cellular antibodies, anti-inflammatory, antioxidants, DNA repair, angiogenesis inhibition, and the microbiome. And Dr. Joel Fuhrman came up with this acronym called GBOMBS, GBOMBS. The G stands for greens, okay? Greens. Now, what do we mean by greens? So we're talking about green vegetables primarily, and most notably the cruciferous vegetables. And we're talking about broccoli and broccolini and kale and cabbage, collards, arugula, bok choy, Brussels sprouts, these types of things. And there's some non-cruciferous that are spinach and the various lettuces and things like that. So the main thing to learn about these is that you want to get the benefit of those sulforaphanes, those isothiocyanates, the powerful antioxidants, is that you have to chew these things, grind them up, dice them up, cut them up before cooking. If you do cook these things rather whole and you haven't cut them much and you have big chunks of them, then at least throw in some raw stuff that's been chopped up along with it somewhere in that meal so that you'll get the benefit of the enzyme. You have to crush the cell wall to release myrosinase enzyme, which will convert the isothiocyanates into a more active form. So then you can get the benefit. So there are various green vegetables. All of these work. The thing that I would add to this green would be green tea. Green tea is rich in EGCG, as epigallocatechin gallate. And it's a big long name, so we call it EGCG for short. And it will actually help with improving your immunity. It's a strong, powerful antioxidant. And it has been shown to help in increasing the amount of interferon produced in the body. Now, the other thing about the cruciferous vegetables particularly, they've been shown that after influenza vaccine, that having eaten that, cruciferous vegetables particularly, that after vaccine, the antibody response was much higher than those who were not on that. So just having that in your diet will increase your efficiency of your immune system so that it multiplies its benefits more. So not just with the vaccine, but even just with exposure. So B, what does the B stand for? B stands for beans. And that includes the beans, peas, and lentils, or the legume group. And they are very healthy, particularly in fiber, the biggest fiber bang for your buck that you can get. And because of that, stimulate a very, very healthy microbiome, but they also have other things with them. So what do beans do? The beans are obviously come in a nice variety of colors, also shapes and sizes. Even just within the lentil family, you can get a whole bunch of different variety of lentils, but beans, of course, a large variety of beans. These are not the kind of beans that we want you to be eating. So what do beans do? So beans are strongly anti-inflammatory, have antioxidants, angiogenesis inhibition, and the microbiome. One of the ways that they have they're rich in is in phytates, and those inhibit cancer cell invasion. But as was spoken of before, beans have gotten a bad rap because they have lectins, and lectins are not an issue if you cook the beans. So don't eat your beans raw. It could make you sick. It won't kill you, but it could make you pretty sick. So just make sure your beans are cooked, and that will neutralize any lectin problem. And that's all you have to worry about with lectins. Don't need to take any supplements. O is for onions. Now, onions are going to include not just the onions as we know them, the green onions, the sweet onions, the red onions, but also garlic is in that family. And they all contain, they're all in what they call the allium family. And they contain an enzyme called allinase, and that also, again, has to be the cell wall has to be crushed to release this enzyme, and this enzyme then converts to the active ingredient that's very protective from onions. So obviously, people don't often eat raw onions, except maybe some green onions sometimes. I like that in various foods and toppings and things like that. But most of the time, you're going to get it cooked. So just make sure it's been cut, diced, crushed, minced, whatever before, for just a short while before it goes into cooking. Or otherwise, have some of that raw stuff around with the cooked, again, so that the raw stuff or uncooked stuff before will have the enzyme around to help that which has already been cooked before. Example of green onions, the whole onion spectrum, including leeks. Some people like leeks. All right, so what do onions do? They have all of these processes, and even we left out was the bottom should also be filled in because it's got fiber in it and will also help the microbiome as well. What does M stand for? M stands for mushrooms. Mushrooms are really a wide variety of those as well, and very underutilized food. Again, you would want to cook these more for safety because of sometimes how they're grown. So wash thoroughly, and then cooked. But a wide variety of mushrooms that are available, and all of them are fine. You don't have to zero in on a particular mushroom. If you say, well, I just like the old white mushroom, I don't like the, shiitake or the portobello or the chanterelle or whatever, that's fine. But mushrooms are really helpful. They have a lot of mechanisms that help with immunity. It's been said that in a study that 10 grams of mushrooms, which is not very much, plus green tea every day would drop breast cancer risk by 89%. And where do we hear about that? We don't hear about that anywhere. But just think of that. Just adding green tea and mushrooms every day to women's lifestyle would decrease their breast cancer risk by nearly 90%. And it's fairly high, whether it's premenopausal or postmenopausal. The other thing about mushrooms is they're high in beta glucans, which increases your secretory IgA defenses. So mushrooms are quite good. So the greens we call the king of superimmunity, the mushrooms we call the queen, or it's pretty equal when you look at all the mechanisms by which mushrooms can help. They've even focused in now on a, what is that? Turkey tail mushroom or something that's going to specifically have very good effects against COVID. It's the latest thing that I heard, but I want to do some more research into that one, but that's what I heard recently. B, the second B stands for berries. And by berries, we have a wide range of berries, from raspberries, blueberries, blackberries, and even includes things like you wouldn't think of necessarily as a berry, but the pomegranate kernels. Think of that as you crack that open and look at the surface as a berry. But besides the acai berry and the other berries, the pomegranates are right in that group. And the berries are very, very high in a number of substances. One is called ellagic acid, which is a very powerful anti-cancer agent. And also it's high in quercetin, which in conjunction with vitamin C is very, very active against COVID and other things. So it kind of potentiates and synergizes with vitamin C in its antioxidant activity as well. So berries are hitting all of the things that we're looking at, except for the antibody formation, although they might start creeping in there as more research is going on with berries in regards to helping with antibody formation. So berries are considered the prince or princess, if you want to go in regards to superimmunity. And lastly, the S stands for seeds or / nuts, which are just hard shell seeds. And seeds, again, come in a number of varieties, colors, sizes, shapes, and flavors. And So whether we're talking about flax and chia seeds, pumpkin seeds, or whether we're talking about nuts like walnuts, almonds, Brazil nuts, macadamias, pecans, whatever, unless you have an allergy, these are really good to have for general overall health, but even especially for immunity. The omega-3 fatty acids, that's very high in most of these, tend to increase the levels of interferon in the body. And so nuts and seeds are a very good thing to add. Now, this diagram just had S. I would almost add another S, and that would be spices, but that's another topic for another day. But seeds also help with inflammation, antioxidation, angiogenesis inhibition, and of course, microbiome, because there's a lot of fiber. So what are the strategic principles in utilizing this G-BOMBS idea? To eat a large salad every day. It's just, if you want to get those number of foods that Jay was saying, and she was spot on. You need the significant number is a variety of 30 of these plants in a week. And when I heard that, I said, I got to see what I'm doing. And it was very easy. In one day, I was amazed at how many I got in one day. And by the end of and then it got to be a challenge. Okay, how many can I get in this week? And I got over 80 in the week. So it's actually very easy to do, especially in Southern California with the availability that we have of fresh produce. So eat, and you can dump 12 of those things in a salad every day. Eat at least a half cup of serving of beans and legumes, either in soup, salads, or some other dish once a day. Eat at least 3 fresh fruits a day, particularly berries, and eat at least 1 ounce of raw nuts or seeds a day, and eat at least 1 double size, that is large serving of green vegetables, either raw, steamed, or in soups, stews, or even in smoothies. So I like that. Soups, salads, or smoothies. Wanted to end with this to kind of get a overall look and balance in regards to lifestyle. And so we've been focusing mainly on N, the nutrition. And if this acronym called New Start is very helpful to remember things. And so N stands for nutrition, and we've spent most of the time in the nutrition part. I mean, it's been shown now that if you're on a whole food plant-based diet, you reduce your severity of having severe or dying of COVID by 75%. And if you're a pescatarian, haven't gone all the way to a whole food plant-based diet, you reduce it by 59%. So on the other hand, what I would really warn people, if they're on the keto diet, this is of all the times now to get people off of keto, you increase your severity, mortality rates from COVID to 386%, almost 4 times the risk. Whereas on the other hand, you could be reducing it by more than half. You can multiply it by almost 4 times by being on a keto diet. Of all the times, if you have friends that are on a keto diet, get them off that now while we have COVID. Please, if they're on proton pump inhibitors, have them get off of those. Switch to something else. This is the time to do that. E is for exercise. We know that exercise improves the natural killer cell activity and presence in the bloodstream. That's why exercise, smokers who exercise have a better mortality than those who don't smoke and don't exercise. That's how powerful exercise is. And so we don't want to overlook that. It needs to be regular and in enough time. Only 1/4 of the population in the United States gets enough exercise every week. Water. Water is good as a diluent, but it also is promoting, it has antioxidant properties of its own. So you want it in adequate amounts, but water on the outside, not just internal, we think of it only internal, but water on the outside in the form of fever baths or contrast hot and cold showers, fomentations, those type of hydrotherapy, we call it. There's a very good website called Hydro for COVID. if you want, and that I would recommend anybody who's coming down with COVID who is not having a fever, they're just having these symptoms, get on those, induce a fever, because that will rev up and amp up your immune system. It will also decrease the viral replication. So you want to induce a natural fever from hot water and contrast with cold. As for sunshine, we've talked about the importance of vitamin D. I don't know if it's come up in earlier during the day, but vitamin D, we know that vitamin D levels are essential and are crucial in regards to the severity of COVID. And if you have the ability to measure your vitamin D, if you get it over 50, that is a good number and place to be. So if you're not already on vitamin D supplementation, if you're not getting enough sunshine, you have dark skin particularly, you should really pay attention to that, get vitamin D supplementation, or at least check your vitamin D level to know where you're at, and get your blood vitamin D levels up to a good range, not just barely normal like 30, but into the optimal range, which they're able to show has a very good effect in regards to defense against COVID. You'll have a less likelihood of coming down with it, and a much, much lower, almost nearly 0% of dying if your vitamin D levels are adequate. T for temperance. Temperance meaning avoiding those toxins that are going to impair your immune system. That could be tobacco smoking. That could be marijuana smoking. That can be alcohol consumption. And you think alcohol will, when it gets ingested in sufficient amounts, reaches your microbiome. What does alcohol do? We use it for hand sanitizer to kill bacteria. Well, what does it do internally? It will kill your bacteria. So it will alter your microbiome. And so these things that you want to avoid are going to help your immune system and overall health. Air, A for air. Fresh air is key. What do they keep telling people? I mean, not only are you spacing people out, but you're trying to get ventilation. So don't be cooped up in some place that doesn't get any ventilation. They're trying to encourage more and more ventilation. And exposure in the air to some of the essential oils like you get in the forest or from other stands of trees. When you get those essential oils breathed into the body, they help your immune system. They rev it up. They also decrease the stress hormones in your body. And so we know that stress also reduces your level of immunity. R is for rest, and particularly for sleep. And we know, again, that inadequate sleep reduces the immune system. I mean, a lot of people get sick. And I just had a good friend who is in this plant-based thing, and he got COVID. I said, how could you get COVID? You're on all these preventative protocols, nutraceuticals. And he says, well, you know what? I didn't practice what I preach. And I got stressed. I had to prepare for this health summit, and I was not getting enough sleep. And, it was around Christmas time, and there's a lot of sweets around, and I had an Achilles injury, so I wasn't getting my exercise. And look what happened. He got COVID. And he's still dealing with it 3 weeks later, a little bit, with a lot of fatigue and mental fatigue. So just because we focus on nutrition doesn't mean you need to watch all the other things as well. It's the whole balance. It's the whole enchilada, you might say, that is really going to help. You let down in any of these areas, then you can still have problems. And T, trust in God. And I use that is because there's so much in the way of anxiety and fear and all these types of things and a worry. And when this happens, it stresses you out. The stress hormones are out. It affects your immune system because it affects your microbiome. There's this very close connection between the brain and the gut. What happens in the gut affects the brain and vice versa. And so you will have a much better immune system and even health when you have trust in something that's much more powerful than you. When you can believe in a creator and that loves you and that wants the best for you and has a plan for you and has overcome death and this present life, then you have so much that you can relax about. You don't have to worry. You don't have any fear. And that's something else above you is in control. You may be not be in control, but there's something else that bigger than you that is. And so when you have that, it just reduces all of the anxiety and all of the fear and improves your health and your immunity. So with that, I would end this talk on super immunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lowe. That was awesome. So we do have a couple questions that have come in.
Okay.
The first, cutting up the cruciferous vegetables. So rice cauliflower. What are your thoughts about rice cauliflower, specifically if it's bought where it's already riced? Is that okay, or does it need to be more fresh when it's cut?
Well, obviously, the fresher you can get it, the better. But having it riced, or you mean like kind of ground up? That is.
I think the question was more, you know how you can purchase it already riced, already cut up from the store? Okay.
Well, yeah, the problem is when it gets cut up and a long time ago, I mean, you don't know how long it's been in the package, then it's going to be oxidized too. And so you're going to have some of that degradation a little bit. And I don't know what the duration is of the enzyme. I don't know how long that enzyme lasts. So the fresher you can get it, the better. I mean, so if you just dice it up, rice it up, munch it up, whatever, before it gets significantly cooked, because once you cook it a fair amount, then it will destroy that enzyme.
Got it. Okay. And someone asked about, what about freeze-dried onions? I think the whole thought might be, you know, what's the nutritional value of freeze-dried onions versus perhaps the fresh ones?
And that would be, again, an onion, almost like the garlic that's already done, that's frozen in those cubes. If it's like that and it's already been munched up, yeah, those are fine. Those are fine.
Great. And then a question about coffee. So you mentioned green tea. What about coffee for immunity?
Coffee for immunity. Okay, I purposely left that out, but this is the take. Caldwell Esselstyn, who is a big nitric oxide fan. Nitric oxide is a gas signaling molecule that helps to dilate arteries, blood vessels, improve blood flow, reduce stickiness and clotting and all these types of things that happen with blood vessels. So the more nitric oxide you have, the more healthy your blood vessels, and the more healthy your blood vessels are, particularly the endothelial cells. That's where the COVID virus is attacking. So it happens that caffeinated coffee does reduce the amount of nitric oxide effect. So whereas decaffeinated coffee doesn't seem to have that problem. Now, it's not the caffeine, however. So you're saying, well, then how can I have green tea? Because that has a little bit of caffeine in it. It's not the caffeine. It's something else that's taken out of the coffee when they decaffeinate it that is causing the problem. So, and we don't know what that is yet. So maybe one of these days we'll find out and they can just take that out and not the caffeine. But right now, it's decaffeinated coffee doesn't seem to have that issue, but caffeinated coffee does seem to have an issue with reducing the amount of nitric oxide. So can't really recommend it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lowe. So appreciate it, as always.
You're welcome.
So fantastic talk on super immunity. So I'll run through these quickly. Really what I want to introduce are our next steps if people want more information. So just closing remarks, please keep in mind the lifestyle is over 80% of the treatment for chronic disease. So walk with a doc, I put on walk with a doc. We typically have other physicians come as well. Please come, feel free to join us. It's the first Saturday of the month from 9 to 10. We do a little talk at first, a healthcare topic, and then we'll all stretch together, and then we'll go walking together for the remainder of the hour. People go at their own pace. It's no pressure. If people have questions, please come ask questions. We want to be a resource. You do not have to walk with us. Just show up, ask your questions, and you can go. We've had that too. So next, Jay Ziabart. So Jay hosts a plant chat every week. And in addition to a number of other support groups and programs she has. And we'll put all this on a summary email as well. This is another flyer for Jay. Dr. Watley, drsarahwatley.com to learn more about her direct primary care practice. And then I really want to mention the whole conference. So this is the conference that Dr. Lowe puts on every year. It's open to the community. It's awesome. It's a great conference, and actually medical professionals get continuing medical education from it. It's a great conference. Usually for something like this, and the physicians, it would cost $300, $400, $500 for a day like this. And Dr. Lowe is so kind, he brings it to the community. This year it's virtual only, but virtual only is $59 to log in, per login. So the speakers he has there at this conference, we have local providers. At the whole conference, these are nationally known doctors, actually internationally known physicians for lifestyle medicine. So absolutely fantastic. Please check it out. Again, it will be in the email. Thank you all for coming. I know we stayed over time, and thank you so much to all the wonderful presenters that donated all their time putting things together and teaching us. So have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and please utilize this as a resource. We'd love to be helpful.